it's the time to say it. Markus Lyra, and only yesterday we heard at your conference in Tallinn, Jaakko Iloniemi giving a speech with the same message. How come they didn't say it before? How did that kill their careers, sort of? And why do they say it now? It looks like, because they are all social democrats, is this an organized campaign to get social democrats around the Baltic Sea to...
Mats, I can only say I wish. You might have gotten the point that I was trying to make, that I am for Finnish and Swedish membership in NATO. Now I can say.
You came out.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I have been saying it, actually. I don't want to say anything else about it, but I mean, how stupid can a civil servant be? But I have been saying it all these 20 some years, that we could have imagined ourselves member of NATO starting, early 1990s or something like that. So, but I haven't gotten anywhere. I mean, I have not been banished to Siberia, or I have not been done anything too much harm. But I think some people could have thought that their careers were in danger.
It's a good thing that they do it, because we need little help from our friends here in Sweden, and it's a very good thing if European Social Democrats tell us what their opinion is, in case they are in favor of NATO, of course. Atis, your turn now. I will ask you a couple of follow-up questions, but please, your 10 minutes of fame.
Well, thank you, Mats.
And welcome back to Stockholm.
Yeah.
Du har ju varit här många gånger. Inte minst under
mycket trevligt att vara
måndagsrörelsen.
tillbaka i Stockholm. Tack så mycket, Mats. Actually, I was really surprised to hear you say that Sweden and Finland think they're small states and they will have no say in NATO. It's really shocked me, because I come from a much smaller state, and I think we have a big say in NATO. I mean, you should contact us and consult us, I mean, who actually called the first EU Foreign Ministers' Council on Crimea, and the first NATO Council meeting? It was the Baltic states, and with the help of Poland. I think we have a pretty big effect there, and precisely because we're on the border of Russia, and we got to act together after '91. And I think that there is a big difference between Sweden and Finland, in that Finland borders Russia, like we do. And that's why Finland joined the Eurozone. That's why Finland joined the Eurozone, Latvia, and now Lithuania. Poland is a big difference because it's a very big country. But it's because we border Russia, and we have to be in the center where the big decisions are made. And believe me, I sit in the European Affairs Committee. And in Latvia, the foreign minister or the finance minister cannot go to Brussels at the council meetings unless he gets a mandate from me, And Vilks, who is our finance minister, a genius, he found the money, like I said. In this situation, he said, wow, it's a big difference when I now go to Brussels, because we first have the Eurozone meetings, and then you can see even the big powers like Great Britain settling up to Wilkes, say, hey, what are you going to say in the next council of the finance ministers? So it is, I mean, small states play a big part. Okay, now I had a Swedish delegation, Defense Committee meeting, come to Riga at the Parliament, and they said, well, how can we cooperate? I said, what do you mean? There's only one thing for you to do, join NATO. How can we cooperate with you if you're not in NATO? Because NATO is a military structure. It's like the army. And, well, I think I shocked them, but then, there was talk about air policing, that Swedish planes could take part in the NATO air policing of the skies. But, let me give you some points, how I think it is, what the problems of this is. And credibility. The Swedish planes don't follow orders from Brussels, NATO centers, Brunson, shape and all that. So if something happens, they run away. So Russia knows this. And what if there is an accident with a Swedish plane? Do the NATO planes defend the Swedish plane if there is an accident, or the collide or something like that? All kinds of problems. And and then even if there could be some shootings, I mean, anything can be expected now. We were all wrong all along. We thought we had integrated Russia, but there's one point I would like to make. The West tried to teach Russia to play cricket, which is a gentleman's game, right? And the Russians tried, and they said, no, it's not good for us. They're playing now hockey, which is a very rough game. And we're still, I think some of us still playing cricket. I'm not saying which countries, but it is a game of hockey, and that is really, really rough, so you can expect anything. And there's another thing about air policing with Swedish planes, and that is that, well, there was an exercise, you alluded to it perhaps, over Iceland with Finnish planes, and were the Swedish planes there too? I don't know, yes. Yeah. But Alison Bales told me at the Lennart Meri conference that there was, well, if the Russian planes had come and sort of challenged this air policing of Iceland, Nordic solidarity, after all, the Finnish planes and the Swedish planes would disappear, and British planes would scramble. That was in the game plan.
We didn't have weapons.
Well, what's the point? But then I heard a wise brain. I remember the discussion in Riga once, just after the Swedish delegation left, that maybe it is a good idea to have Swedish planes land in Lielvārde. Lielvārde is the military airbase built by NATO and Latvian Defense Ministry, like the Emeri north of Tallinn, and like in Šiauliai, where you already have it. And because they have to know the terrain, because when they do join NATO, they're all ready. They're trained and they know what to do. So I'm not against it, but by all means, but you have to have a clear vision of what you want to do. And also, I luckily sat on the plane from Tallinn to Stockholm next to Mikael Holmberg, and he enlightened me that in the 1st of April, there were 2 Gripen planes that landed in Šiauliai. I didn't know that. There was nothing in the Latvian press about that. And there were some kinds of games of scaring away the Russian planes, and we have this all the time in the Baltic Sea. It's not only Baltic states, but you have problems in Sweden. You all know that, of course. Mr. Holmberg has written about that 2 days or 3 days ago. So it's actually happening. And the American commander, with the Americans are there now, 10 American fighters. 10 fighters is a force, They're well trained. And they were happy about this. So if there is a clear vision, I think we'll probably go along with that. There was an interesting comment in the Lennart Meri conference, and really this should be taken seriously. It was a Polish girl who knows Sweden quite well, and it was in the morning session, right?
Justyna Gotkowska.
Yeah, okay. And she said that even more important for NATO, and that's us, the Baltic states and Poland, is that not that Sweden should join so much NATO, but she should be able to defend her territory, because this makes us very vulnerable. I gave an interview now, said, can you imagine that the Baltic states are defending Sweden, right now? It's awkward to say that, But we're the front line. We've got the American jets and the German jets. We finally got the Germans to get over their complexes, about the Second World War. And there was a debate in Germany about those 6 fighters. There was a debate. But in the end, the government, and who's in the government? You were talking about Social Democrats. It's Merkel and the foreign minister is Mr. Steinmeier. And they decided, yes, the Balts will have these 6 fighters. The Germans are coming back. Get over these things. It's so long since the Second World War ended, We're in a complete new situation, The world is changing. China is rising. India is rising. Are we sleeping? and so on.
And your final point.
And my final point. My final point is this. You have a solidarity declaration from 2009. Now, the Russians have a very good saying. Now, I'm not good in Russian, but it's серьезные люди, means serious people. If you make such a declaration and you don't have capability to put your money or your capability where your mouth is, you know, you're not serious people. And Russians despise non-serious people. Then better don't say anything. And I think and that Sweden, I mean that Finland, I was just told, is going to sign in May the host nation support. So Finland is moving ahead, and Sweden is nowhere near it. Maybe you can correct me. And then the final point, the very final point, is that the public relations, I mean, when the Latvian, and I suppose the same as Estonian and Lithuanian and the Polish public wake up to the fact that we're protecting a country that is much stronger, wealthier than we are, you know, and we were part of the Swedish Empire, you know, and we're now, look where we are, you know, that we're actually pretending a the empire, Swedish Empire, you know, form. It's not going to look good. Think about that. It could become a political problem.
Thank you, Atis. You answered one of my questions, and that, at least indirectly, my question was, do you trust the Swedish Solidarity Declaration? I'll make it the harder version is, do you trust NATO?
Of course.
The reason I posed that question is because 3 years ago I was in the NATO headquarters in Brussels, and I asked the question, how do you think about the Russian threat to the Baltic states? And there was a high NATO officer who said well, our saying is that since we cannot defend the Baltic states, there is no threat from Russia. I will repeat it one more time. Since there is no threat from Russia, since we cannot defend the Baltic states, there is no threat from Russia. That was 3 years ago. But we were quite shocked in the Swedish delegation. And my friends from the Social Democratic Party almost fainted because we have always assumed that NATO means what it says.
Can I comment that?
Yeah.
This was 3 years ago. He's not that guy didn't know what he was talking about.
He's not there any longer.
Yeah,
no.
We got rid of him.
Yeah.
The point is, now, talking again about small states and influence, NATO told us, including top officials, I won't name who, that you don't need a defense plan. Because you're in NATO, you've got paragraph 5. We know our history. We said, no, we need a defense plan. Contingency planning, and it's got to be on paper, and it's got to be very concrete. We did it. And that's what's happening in the Baltic states today. When we pressed the button and they said, we need you now, they came.
Good. That's the positive thing that is being said. Let me just add that we heard today that there are American boots on the ground in the Baltic states. I think personally that I would be glad, which is a very good thing. I would be very glad if we had more Swedish boots on the ground in Sweden.
Maybe you'll get Latvian boots in Sweden.
Veronica, your time now. You're still an ambassador, that should be said. So you're not free to speak your mind yet about things. But
thank you, Mats.
Leaving Brussels now and your post at NATO headquarters, you can at least give us a picture of what you have been doing all the time. The very fact that we have a Swedish ambassador to NATO, I mean, that's a very positive thing in my book. 25 years ago, Swedish ministers couldn't travel to Brussels because we were still neutral at that time. They preferred to travel to East Germany or whatever, Cuba, but never Brussels. Now we have our delegation and soon a new ambassador. Please.
Thank you, Mats. And thank you for allowing me to participate in this discussion, this debate. The timing, I would say, of this conference could probably not be better, take into account what's happening in our neighborhood. but from a Swedish, it's not Chatham House rules, I understand, so I will use my words carefully. As you said, I'm still a government official. I hope to remain that a few more years. I cannot speak as freely as Heather just did, but it's also a difficult period to have this conference and to have a discussion and debate about NATO, because the situation is changing so rapidly and so dramatically, and it takes time for a country, for a government, for a Swedish parliament, I've spoken there twice now in the past month, to fully apprehend what's happening and to basically reposition yourself. And that's probably, we alluded to the Defense Commission work that is ongoing. But I will make 3 main points in my short intervention now. And that is, you were now just referring to a visit you did it recently as well, but only 3 years ago, when even talking about collective defense, you got a certain answer, and that answer was quite normal. And I will claim that answer was normal until 8 weeks ago. Until 8 weeks ago, and then I go back a little bit. What you said, you've asked me what I had done at NATO for the past years. I've been there actually in my 7th and last year. So in 6.5 years, the mission statement I had when I was appointed ambassador to NATO was, NATO is about international crisis management. It's the most competent and the best global organization for large-scale international crisis management operations. We were then scaling up our participation, our contributions to the ISAF mission. NATO was /Afghanistan/ISAF. Any allied country would have told you that, and if you look at the debate we've had in our own country these past years, it has been NATO was /Afghanistan. And the main, as I said, the mission statement I had and the request I had from the Swedish government was to say, when we contribute with Swedish soldiers and Swedish military equipment to NATO-led operations, we should be able to have access to information, to documentation. We should be able to sit at the table. We should not suffer any risks, other risks than allied countries do when they contribute to NATO's crisis management operations. We have had meetings at summit level. I think the Prime Minister has been at his 3rd NATO summit, and this as a representative of a partner country. Minister Bildt, Minister Enström come twice a year to NATO headquarters and participate in ministerial meetings, and they discuss and they influence, they shape the policy of the alliance in the operations to which we contribute, be it KFOR, be it ISAF, OUP, Libya, while that was ongoing. I participate at my level when discussions are raised on the political side, and our military, you have military structures. NATO meets basically in the shape of the format with all the troop contributing countries participating in the decision shaping process. So NATO delivered. I was asked to push for this agenda. It was, of course, not only Sweden, it was Finland. It was a big contributing country to NATO-led operations like Australia. It was Georgia, by the way, who has also been pushing. We want to sit at the table. We want to be able to influence what NATO is doing. So NATO, in its role as crisis management operations, delivered. We could influence and we've shaped those decisions, and we got the information simultaneously, basically, as allied countries. So it was NATO in its role as crisis management organization, which has been the main relationship between us and the alliance. And this was still, I would even say this last year, I mean, yes, the Finnish colleague just comes from Kabul. This past year, it has all been about, now we developed, Heather alluded to that, this relationship of partnerships, coming extremely close to an organization, and we have to maintain that relationship when the big operations like ISAF are winding down. So this past year, the discussions, and I would say until 8 weeks ago, the discussion was about shaping the new partnership policy, maintaining interoperability that we had acquired these past years, and that's been extremely important for Sweden and the Swedish armed forces to have this interoperability. We didn't need really the exercises as much because we were active in Afghanistan. That was indirectly an indirect effect of our close military relationship. And that now had to be maintained. There are big, grandiose plans being designed that were supposed to be basically inaugurated in September at the NATO summit for partners in maintaining interoperability. And then we discussed how can we maintain the close political relationship. And there, yes, as also several have alluded to earlier today, politically, we have claimed that there are many global partners. NATO was not so much about European partnerships, but global partnerships. I can, just a personal reflection. You can come to certain NATO meetings with partners well, you would find that you nearly have a UN feeling. You have now the Japanese ambassador, the South Korean ambassador. In Australia and New Zealand we know because they were part of the ISAF mission. These countries have now been active, demanding, maintaining and developing new relationships with the alliance, or for military reasons. Interoperability is important even for the Pacific partners, or for political reasons, having a close political relationship with the alliance. That's been the name of the game until 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks ago, the situation changed. And when I went back to Parliament, I was asked to speak to the Defense Commission, and they had actually just been to Brussels, so it was a little bit, in one way, unfortunate. We had given a clear line for the 2-3 times we had met the Defense Commission on where NATO was heading. Collective defense was there, theoretically, but Russia is, according to the strategic concept, a strategic partner to the alliance. There's a NATO-Russia Council. I have a very active Russian NATO ambassador, Alexander Grushko, who has tried to play, until again 8 weeks ago, tried to play quite a constructive role, looking at working together with the alliance on issues of common interest and the practical cooperation between NATO and Russia has been quite active and quite constructive. But as I said, then things changed 8 weeks ago. And sitting now and observing those changes, it has been much more radical and much more far-reaching than I would have expected. And that was, let's say, the point I tried to make to Parliament, and I'll make to you today as well. And it was particularly visible when Minister Bildt came to Brussels only 2 weeks ago to NATO's Foreign Affairs Council. Minister Bildt came to attend the ISAF session, which he has done, as I said earlier, in the past years. And now he had to wait for several hours because the alliance was discussing the Baltic Sea area.
Yeah.
They were discussing how can we reassure the Baltic countries.
But we were at the table.